Mark Millar continues to make headlines. I had to catch myself there. I always want to kind of call him Mark Millar because that's how it's spelled, but it's Mark Millar. He's making headlines again. This time he's claiming the superhero movie genre ended after Avengers Endgame, and then he posits that Marvel and DC are trying to course correct after a bunch of abysmal movies that came out in the wake of Avengers Endgame. He recently spoke with the New York, actually, that's supposed to be the New York Post and the New York Times. That's a mistake on my end. But about his upcoming live action adaptation, The Chosen One, on Netflix, which is based on his American Jesus comic book series. While discussing the series, he also touched on the history of the superhero movie genre, saying these movies generally weren't very good prior to 1999. They were usually made by people who didn't understand or care about the material, with two exceptions: Richard Donner with Superman and Tim Burton with Batman. I think a lot of people would say Batman Returns is up there as well. Maybe that's what he's talking about. He probably is talking about those franchises, potentially, the Donner with the Superman and then the Burton franchise. He continued and said, so it was amazing in 1999 when Marvel cracked the code and made these things great. It wasn't just that the technology caught up to the material. It was that the people who made these movies created them with real dignity. However, he then shared that the genre ended with Endgame. He said the genre had a great run and kind of died in 2019 with Avengers Endgame. That felt like the last truly great superhero movie. I'm going to disagree with that. I think Endgame was a mediocre film. I think it had some great moments, and when it served as a good capstone. You had some really great moments with the Avengers Assemble, the big fight against Thanos at the end, but a lot of the time travel shenanigans, how they ended Cap's story, really kind of soured that film. But there were some really good moments there. I think Infinity War was probably the last good superhero movie. I know people have their criticisms of that film as well, but I do think that one probably is the last good one. I would not classify Avengers Endgame as there. But that's what Mark Millar said. He said, he goes on and says, as for why he believes it ended with Endgame, despite a plethora of Marvel Studios productions as well as DC films coming out since then. I mean, we have Eternal, Shang-Chi, Black Widow, you had Spider-Man No Way Home, you had Doctor Strange The Multiverse of Madness, you had Black Panther Wakanda Forever, you had Thor Love and Thunder. On the DC's end, we just had Flash, we had Shazam Fear of the Gods, we had Blue Beetle, you had Black Adam. So you had all of those films coming out. And then even then, if you want to go and look at some of the more like non-Marvel, non-DC stuff, there was the Samaritan over on Amazon. I'm sure there were some others in there as well that were non-Marvel, non-DC, but that's kind of the one that stands out to me. Nothing else is kind of jumping in my head right now. But he goes on and says, everything since then, I feel that the people involved haven't loved the material the way that Sam Raimi loves Spider-Man, or Christopher Nolan, who read 50 years worth of Batman comics before he started doing Batman. So he thinks it has a lot to do with the people creating these movies and them not actually liking the source material and liking the comics. And then I was a little bit confused here. Because he says, while he believes the genre ended with Avengers Endgame, he does think that Marvel and DC are attempting to course correct. He says, I think it will come back. These movies made too much money for them to fail. So that makes sense. Like, he figures that, obviously, it's like, he figures that, hey, these movies were making a lot of money. There's probably that market is still there. We just got to find a way to tap back into it again and be able to churn out these huge mega blockbusters again and just make that buku. So that makes sense. But this right here is where I didn't really understand what he was trying to say here. And I don't know if it's lost in translation with the New York Post or what's going on here. I was really confused here. He says, what I know from talking to friends at DC and Marvel, there's a massive course correct being planned. They need to get it back on track. Getting some people with an interesting voice again is critical. He then says, every director who did a superhero movie for the first 10 to 15 years had success on the entertainment scene before that, and unexpected choices were made as opposed to just jobbing directors who treated it like any other gig. So I really don't know what he means there. Obviously, the idea that DC and Marvel would try and course correct kind of makes sense. You might see that with James Gunn. We'll see. I don't really see Marvel course correcting at all right now. I just don't see that. There's nothing that they've announced or anything that they've really said that is saying that they're course correcting. Yeah, they've changed some writers on a couple of their movies that they had already planned, but I don't really think that has the writers really do a lot. I think Kevin Feige is the one that does a lot of the storytelling on a lot of this stuff, and I think he's just kind of lost a lot of creative juices, and I really think that they just are kind of floundering and they don't really have any direction or ideas on where they really want to take the Marvel Cinematic Universe moving forward. I mean, we've had numerous comments about them just like we did Eternals because it has a bunch of woke ideology involved in it. So that's why it got bumped up to the top of the list. I mean, that's literally what they said. So you see where their priorities lie. It has nothing to do with storytelling. And I don't think bringing on new blood is going to be able to change that when they still have to answer to Kevin Feige at the end of the day. Nevertheless, though, like unexpected choices were made. I guess if you didn't realize that they were going to push like straight up propaganda in their movies, I guess you would see that as unexpected. But that they were telling you that that's what they were going to do. Victoria Alonso was going out and saying that in pretty much every kind of public appearance she made, like since Captain Marvel came out, and then as opposed to just jobbing directors who treat it like any other gig. Maybe that's me not understanding his Scottish terminology there. Maybe I don't know what jobbing means, but to me that means just picking a director who treated it like any other gig. But I don't know. Help me out. Let me know what you think he's saying there. But he's not alone in this assertion that the superhero movie genre is over, and we've covered this pretty extensively over on the website. I think I've covered here on YouTube as well. But prolific Batman and Punisher writer Chuck Dixon shared a Facebook back in June. The superhero cycle had a good run, but it's over. I then actually was really curious as to why he thought that, so I reached out to him and got his thoughts, and this is what he told me. He said, every movie cycle ends. Westerns give way to spies, who give way to horror, and on and on. The superhero genre has had an extraordinarily long run, but a number of factors have contributed to drop in interest for comic book-based content, oversaturation, inconsistent quality, and Hollywood's restricted access to the Chinese market. He then blamed DC and Marvel, specifically their parent company. He says both Disney and Warner's are to blame as well. Marvel fans had to put up with a steady assault of woke content and overbearing amount of comedy included in material, a general decline in the quality of effects, most damaging, a deliberate departure from the source material at every opportunity. DC screwed the pooch by constantly rebooting their franchises with new auteurs and casts. In addition, they diluted their brand with multiple different and conflicting continuities spread across TV and features. Which Batman is real? Who is the authorized Superman? He then pointed to the Flash film, saying, and they damned themselves with this latest Flash flick by leaning into all the multiverse nonsense in order to cram as many cameos into this failed project as possible. Again, it's not just Chuck Dixon. Even DC Studios' James Gunn seems to recognize this. He was asked by former Lex Luthor actor Michael Rosenbaum, do you think that there are too many superhero shows and movies? And because I remember when I did Smallville, there were none. He said, yes, yeah, I do think there's too many. However, when asked what he should do about that, he said, but I don't think it's much less a problem of too many. And yes, we're not going to overextend ourselves at DC. We're going to be very careful with the product that we put out and making sure everything is as good as it can possibly be. I think that's, he then points to the creators behind the films, similar to what Mark Millar was saying, I guess. He says, I think that what's happened is people have gotten really lazy with their superhero stories, and they have gotten to the place where, oh, it's a superhero, let's make a movie about it. And they make, oh, let's make a sequel because the first one did pretty well. And they aren't thinking about why is this story special? What makes this story stand apart from other stories? What is the story at the heart of it all? Why is this character important? What makes this story different? That it fills a need for people in theaters to go see or on television. And I think that people have gotten a little lazy, and there's a lot of biff, pow, bam stuff happening in movies. Like I'm watching third acts of superhero films where I really just don't feel like there's a rhyme or reason to what's happening, and I don't care about the characters. You can point to, I would argue, look at Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the idea that Ronan is just kind of stunned by them doing a dance-off. It's like, why? There's no rhyme or reason to that. So he, I would point to him as an example of this. And they've gotten too generic. There's this sort of, don't get me wrong, I really liked Guardians up until that point, and then I was like lost. I lost the immersion because Ronan is this very serious guy. He's very committed to destroying the planet of Xandar. He literally does a suicide mission with his ship to get there to break the kind of shield wall that the Xandarians are building with their ship. He eventually gets through, and then he's about to destroy them. His pretty much life goal. And then he's just standing there perplexed by a dance-off. And it's like, nah, dude, he doesn't care. He's dropping the hammer and they're all dead. So he goes on and says, I like very serious superhero movies. I like very comedic superhero movies. I like ones that are really just a murder mystery, but it's with superheroes. Yeah, I think you can do different genres too, again. But I also think that you can do still paint by numbers, superheroes fighting crime, stopping crime, et cetera, et cetera. And people will still go and watch that if it's well done. He goes on and says, I like to see these different types of stories as opposed to seeing the same story told over and over again. I don't know how many times And then Rosenbaum shared his thoughts and noted that the stories need to be more compelling. So he's actually pointing out that the stories suck, which I think that's the real problem. And he goes on and says, Gunn then goes and shares his thoughts. I think that also, he's admitting that the stories suck. He's saying, I think that also. And then people say superhero fatigue. I think that you see see now that it's not a real thing. People are fatigued with repetition. I don't think it's really just superhero movies. I think you're seeing it happening now. It's spectacle films in general. I think he's saying that because Guardians did decently, but it didn't do as good as the first one, and it didn't do as well as the second one either. If you look at the box office, especially if you adjust for inflation and you look at how many tickets were sold. Nevertheless, he goes on and says, but there's a lot of spectacle films made, and they just have gotten really generic, and they've gotten boring, and they aren't about characters, and there's no emotion to them. And there should be emotion in things no matter. That should always be there, some type of emotion. I'm not saying it can't be really light. I'm not saying it can't be really heavy. I'm saying there should be some sort of emotion. He then says in a horror movie, if you like that main character, then you're much more scared when they're about to get killed. The stakes matter. So that is what is going on here. I think you have a lot of people saying that the time of the superhero might be over. There's too many superhero movies being made. The quality of those superhero movies isn't up to where it needs to be. It's actually pretty poor. But let me know what you think of Mark Millar's thoughts on the superhero genre. Do you think he is accurate? Do you share a similar opinion to Chuck Dixon or maybe James Gunn? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this content, like these videos, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and make sure you hit that bell for notifications.
Subscribe for more.